After nearly 14 months of war in the Middle East and minus 1 day of all that period of time of struggles and military clashes between Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and Israel is coming to a ceasefire, at least for a temporary time. The people claim, as you'll see in a minute, President Biden is going to say that this is supposed to be a permanent ceasefire leading toward an end of the war. But I think it's safe to say we got a long way to go on that. But before we get into what the significance of this is and what actually it means, let me show you what President Biden said just a little while ago. First of all, he's going to be talking about what is not going to be allowed in this ceasefire.
I just spoke with the Prime Minister of Israel and Lebanon. I'm pleased to announce that their governments have accepted the United States proposal to end the devastating conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. Effective at 4 a.m. tomorrow local time, the fighting across the Lebanese-Israeli border will end. Will end. This is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities. What is left of Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations will not be allowed, well, I emphasize, will not be allowed to threaten the security of Israel again. Over the next 60 days, the Lebanese army and state security forces will deploy and take control of their own territory once again. Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure in southern Lebanon will not be allowed to be rebuilt. And over the next 60 days, Israel will gradually withdraw its remaining forces. And civilians on both sides will soon be able to safely return to their communities.
Okay, first of all, it's important to understand what actually has been agreed to. We've been talking on this show almost throughout this entire war about the possibilities of ceasefires and how Israel didn't want any of them, and so they kept putting conditions that would make them impossible to have. And so the question now is that, okay, what changed? Because why did they suddenly go with a ceasefire now when they haven't agreed to it in the past? There's a couple of things that I think are important to point out. First of all, the situation that Biden is talking about here, that this is supposed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities. Well, in times of other wars, throughout human history and around the world, very oftentimes you have to get a ceasefire first so that you can then have the space to do negotiated settlement, that you can get it off the table and you can get the issue of the war resolved. So that is a necessary first step. And as I have been saying throughout, and definitely repeat here today, I'm definitely for this. Anything that stops the killing and stops the attacks so that innocent people die, I'm 100% for. But we have to keep a clear mind here. And this is probably not because Israel suddenly had this desire to want to achieve peace and find a way to live with their partner north of the border. They could have done that at any time. One of the main reasons I'm pretty confident in that Israel chose to accept this ceasefire now is a couple of things. Number one is because they're hurting pretty bad. Now, we know that the Hezbollah side has been hurting desperately. They've been gashed badly at the top level by their, the loss of Hassan Nasrallah. Many of the top leaders, many of their commanding generals, I mean, a whole slew of the top has just been devastated. Of course, you remember the pager attack, the cell phone attack, etc., which took out over 1,000, or at least wounded over 1,000 Hezbollah fighters at the upper levels. And then, of course, then Israel went in on the ground, and they've been fighting in southern Lebanon for a long time. So for sure, the Hezbollah side is really suffering. And of course, Lebanon itself, which was already in a terrible economic straits when this happened, has just been further devastated. So it's been catastrophic for all of the people in Lebanon. And definitely they wanted a ceasefire. So they will benefit from a ceasefire. That's been the case for a long time. But now then the situation is also, I think, that Israel is needing a ceasefire. And I've speculated that this probably would have been the case even before then because they have suffered a lot of casualties. But I think now that gives you an idea just how serious this is, because I think we talked about last week, there has been a number of reports out that many of the reservists in Israel are starting to not show up for duty because they said, you're wearing us out. I mean, hundreds of thousands of them have had their lives disrupted, and they see on the ground that there's not working towards any objective here. And now that it's starting to fray and pull apart the Israeli society. You've also seen lots of protests that have been going on for months against the Israeli government. They want to see these wars come to an end. There's been a lot of pressure put on the Israeli government by a lot of these 60 to 80,000 people that have been dislocated in the northern part of Israel, wanted to go back to their homes, and they were unable to do so. And so I think that Netanyahu thought, all right, we're going to solve this militarily. We're going to go in on the ground. We're going to drive them all the way back to the Litani River, because they had said that the previous ceasefire that ended the 2006 Lebanon war was never adhered to by the Hezbollah side. Certainly that's true, because that required no Hezbollah below the Litani River, and they were there almost from the beginning and stayed there throughout, and they're there to this day, even at the moment. Now, part of the deal of this ceasefire is that Hezbollah will have to go back north of the Litani River, basically UN Resolution 1701. So they're kind of saying that's what we were before, that's what's going to have to be. So it's hard to imagine that didn't happen back then and that suddenly all the Hezbollah side is going to withdraw willingly. That remains to be seen. So we need to be clear-minded about this. The chances of this resulting in a permanent ceasefire that has any duration is still very much up in the air. And there's a lot of opportunities this could go south. We'll see how that goes on, because some people have an incentive to quit. A lot of people do fighting, and other people have an incentive to continue on fighting. Some of the hardliners on both sides have already been in the media saying that they're not for this. They don't want it. And of course, part of the terms that Israel set were that any violations of this ceasefire, they are going to reserve the full right to continue to go back to attack. That's what they said so far. But I want to look at a couple of things that Biden said specifically in that first soundbite that I just showed you there, is that he said Hezbollah will not be allowed to threaten Israel again. Well, what does that mean, not be allowed? I mean, and how would you enforce that? I mean, part of the problem with the UN Resolution 1701 is the enforcement mechanism. Once Israel withdrew and they had this discussion, well, then what mechanism did they have to ensure that there were no Hezbollah south of the Litani River, and what would there be in the future? How would that be different? It's really hard to imagine a diplomatic solution to prevent that. That's something that remains to be seen. So you see already you're starting with the foundation of something that seems pretty unlikely to be manifest. The next thing he said was specifically Hezbollah will not be able to rebuild any of its situations south of Lebanon. So again, I'm not sure how you're going to prevent that. I mean, part of the way that Hamas built their tunnel systems, part of the way that Hezbollah built their tunnel systems in the north was because they figured out how to do it without being seen. Obviously, if Israel had seen it before, they would have been able to take action at the time. So it's going to be hard to imagine how that's going to happen. Also, and you'll see this in Netanyahu in a minute, that by Israel reserving the right to determine the conditions of a ceasefire and when that might end and what would constitute a violation, it's in their sole discretion what it's going to be, meaning that this could any time that they desire. If Israel, for example, let's say that it takes some period of time and they're able to rebuild their military strength and get things back to where they want, they can just manufacture any kind of excuse to say, there it is, there's a violation, they violate it, and then they'll continue on. So there's a very real possibility that this is designed by the Netanyahu government to have pause in the fighting so that they can stop the casualties that they've been suffering and to rebuild their strength for renewal at some other time, because they're not stupid. I'm not the only one that says, wait a minute, where's an enforcement mechanism on this? How would you ever prevent them short of military occupation? And we'll see, if that was the plan all along. One other thing about that Biden had said here, I want to point out, he was talking about the other war going on in here that is very much not in the ceasefire situation, and that is with the Hamas.
This deal supports Lebanon's sovereignty, and so it heralds a new start for Lebanon. If fully implemented, this deal can put Lebanon on a path toward a future that's worthy of its significant past. And just as the Lebanese people deserve a future of security and prosperity, so do the people of Gaza. They too deserve an end to the fighting and displacement. The people of Gaza have been through hell. Their world's absolutely shattered. Far too many civilians in Gaza have suffered, far too much. And Hamas has refused for months and months to negotiate a good faith ceasefire and a hostage deal. And so now Hamas has a choice to make. Their only way out is to release the hostages including American citizens, which they hold.
Okay, so you saw there a repetition of what Biden has been saying for a long time, all throughout the presidential campaign. Both he and Vice President Kamala Harris have been saying the same thing, that phrase, far too many innocent civilians have been killed. That's it. And that's all. That's all they've said about the Palestinian people. No more than that. And it was just a throwaway line to stop to the Palestinian supporters in the United States, the other democratic supporters of Palestine, and of any kind of equity on the situation, any kind of justice on the situation. And they didn't buy it during the election. That was one of the reasons why they lost. And there's definitely not going to be buying it now, because you saw all he did was throw all of the responsibility onto the Hamas side. They alone have refused the negotiation. They've refused ceasefires. They alone have been the sticking point. Not a word about what the Israelis have been doing. Not a word about how many civilians have been killed. The tens of thousands of innocent civilians, the majority of which a massive number of children. I think I've seen the average age is 5.5 years old or something like that. When you add everybody together, it is just shocking. Not a word about that. No pressure being put on the Israelis to make a negotiated settlement here, to seek a ceasefire here. None whatsoever. Netanyahu said he doesn't want it. There are still plenty of people in Israel. And by the way, they're still in the process of depopulating the entire northern part. No talk about stopping that. Israel doesn't want to. They want to continue moving with that so that they can get them out. And then, of course, it's anybody's guess as to whether they're going to send in settlers after that and try to keep the land that they have. But we don't need to be under no impressions that this is anything about caring about the people of Hamas. I'm sorry, the people of Palestine in the Gaza Strip, the people of Lebanon in the southern part, regardless of any affiliation. There's no concern about any of that in the United States, only about helping Israel in the situation in the north and facilitating Israel to continue having the fight in Gaza Strip and taking no action about it. It's important to understand that. Next, I want to turn the attention to what Netanyahu himself has said, because that's also illustrative.
We struck strategic targets across the entire breadth of Lebanon, and we hit dozens of terror strongholds in Dahia. The earth under Beirut is trembling. Tonight, I introduced to the cabinet a proposed ceasefire in Lebanon. The duration of the ceasefire depends on what happens in Lebanon. In full coordination with the United States, we retain complete military freedom of action. Should Hezbollah violate the agreement or attempt to rearm, we will strike decisively. If it tries to rebuild its fortifications along the border, we will strike. If it launches a rocket, digs a tunnel, or brings in a truck with missiles, we will strike.
So you see that they reserve all the definitions. So this is almost certainly primarily motivated by the Israeli side, because they are suffering lots of casualties and lots of problems with their reserve forces. And to continue this operation, they were running out of steam. And they probably calculated that the amount of space that they had still to conquer was greater than they have the resources to do right now. So they had to resort to this. I think that's the most likely motivation for the Israeli side to do this, because it isn't the White House. I assure you, the White House did not suddenly come out of nowhere and bring a lot of pressure on the Netanyahu government. That day passed a long time ago, and the motivation that should have led to that were many, many months ago, and we decided not to take it. So the likelihood is that that's the reason for this coming in now, and that also means that the chance of this actually turning into any kind of peace is very low. And in fact, there's no one is even talking about getting to the root causes of this war. Why did it start in the first place? What led Hezbollah to start attacking Israel? Because prior to October 7th, they hadn't, until Israel started attacking and killing large numbers of Palestinian people. And then in the deference to them, after 10/7, that's when they started attacking into Israel. And of course, it only continued on from that point forward. So until you're even willing to discuss that, you're not going to get at the root cause. Now, because Hezbollah has been so badly hit and so badly damaged, it will certainly take them a long time to rebuild their strength. And there's zero chance, that they're going to go away, that they're just going to, fold their shoulders, say, okay, fine, we won't ever do anything again. We'll just quit and lay down and just try to live, exist. They're not going to do that. but they are going to lick their wounds. So they probably have incentive and motivation to stick with the ceasefire. We'll see if Israel allows them to, but they probably will try because they have more incentive than the Israel side does for a ceasefire so that they can spend time, probably years that they would need to rebuild. But without addressing the fundamental causes and the underlying reasons why they've been resisting so far, there is no chance that they're just going to, live in peace, as Biden tried to say a second ago. They'll just bide their time until they have the ability to resist again. And of course, that depends on what Israel does. So that is really where we're at in terms of the reasons for the ceasefire and what we can expect through. But let's also understand the conditions that this is built around, because it's really important here. We're still possibly waiting on an Iranian response to the last Israeli attack into their country. They promised a big response. Now, it's also true, interestingly, that in the initial response out of Iran is similar to some of those in Hezbollah, and say, we actually welcome it. We think it's a good idea. So they want to get that off the table too, because that's their number one proxy, and they have motivation to stop the killing of their people in that area. So they're motivated for that too. But again, that doesn't mean that they're not going to strike later. That just means that they want time to rebuild strength of Hezbollah and any of their other proxies in the region, and their own defenses, which were weakened by the last Israeli attack, especially on some of their nuclear facilities. So without addressing any of the underlying causes between the tensions between Israel and Iran, that won't change either, and the enmity will continue to be there. So that's one of the things that's going on there. Obviously, the Gaza situation remains unresolved. And until that gets taken care of, the whole reason why Hezbollah got involved in the first place will continue to exist. Lots of problems in the West Bank. This doesn't even touch any of that. Israel has been doing lots of kinetic activity in the West Bank, destroying houses. Settler active violence has been going on in the area. And then, of course, that has a commensurate rise in some of the Arabs striking back against Israeli targets there, and the thing just stays roiled, i.e., the conditions that led to conflict there are still in existence here. And this doesn't even come close to talking about what's gonna end the war. How is all this going to be resolved? Because I think, as we've said many times, Netanyahu needs this war to keep going on, because the minute that the war stops and that it's actually over, now then Israel can get back to kind of the normal governance, and then that's when people turn back to, oh yeah, about that trial that you were in the middle of, about some of your corruption and some of the other things that could send you to jail. Let's get back to that. And if the war is even just on the back burner, not even fully resolved, but on the back burner, now then people can say, okay, let's get back to politics. And by the way, that will give the political opposition against Netanyahu all kinds of incentive to say, all right, now it's time to change the horse. So he personally has incentive for this war to go on, which is another reason why I'm very doubtful that this ceasefire is going to hold very long, and probably only for as long as he deems it necessary for him to rebuild his military strength to potentially continue going forward in Gaza, in Hezbollah, in southern Lebanon. I can foresee a day where he announces, oh my gosh, we discovered that the Hezbollah was trying to come back in, and they had a truck of missiles, and they've been digging a tunnel here and doing that there, and we had to go in. We tried to give them a chance. We tried to end this war by peaceful means, and they wouldn't have it. So now then we're going to go back in on the ground, and we're driving all the way to Litani. If he thinks he can do that, I think it's almost certain that that's what he's going to do, because otherwise, what has all this been for? He's been saying that he wants to clear out that northern part and create a buffer zone for the Israeli people living in the north part of Israel. So if he doesn't do that, and if they don't willingly leave and go out, then that's going to remain an open sore. But then, of course, then the same situation here. He's still going to be locked in with what's going to happen with Gaza. They're clearing out the northern part right now. Will public opinion around the world and in the region, even the United States, and it's already starting to fray in Great Britain, as a matter of fact, interestingly enough. So Great Britain refused to say we would not arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he comes to the UK because of that arrest warrant that's out there. And a lot of the public opinion is really starting to sour. If that keeps going on, if the Israelis keep on depopulating the Gaza Strip, and you're talking millions of people live there, this still could turn against Israel, and they could then say, we're going to step this back up and to use more war, because if we somehow escalate it into Iran, then that becomes, the new focus, and nobody's going to be against Israel if they get into a clash with Iran. So this is still a dangerous position. And one of the other reasons I think that the timing of this was that I think that Netanyahu calculates that he has a friendlier person in Donald Trump. And so I think that he's like, all right, we can definitely use the space here to build up our strength and to recover a little bit and just catch our breath between now and the time Trump comes in. And then if anything happens then, I think that he may calculate that he's got President Biden's much more firm backing than Biden. So while Biden has refused to use the leverage we've had, he has still begrudgingly given some help, but he has not encouraged him to go in any direction, and has tried to at least slow things down, and has put roadblocks in there. So it's not exactly been fully supportive. He's kind of half in, half out, and it could be that Netanyahu calculates that under the right conditions that Trump could be all in, and we'll see how that turns out. He has been in some regards. Trump has historically been against any kind of wars, but when it comes to Israel, there could be a different set of rules, and we'll have to wait and see how that happens. But that's one of the things I'll be looking for. It could be that Netanyahu wants to test the waters of the incoming administration, is just looking for a breather in between now and then. That does have some military plausibility. Forget about the morality of continuing to kill people unnecessarily in the Gaza Strip. But be that as it may, that's where things are right now. So that's what we know at the moment. Allegedly, this is going to take effect until, 4 a.m. local time, which is 9 p.m. on the U.S. West Coast later tonight. And we'll see how long it lasts. And look, I don't think it's any surprise that what Netanyahu has done, and he mentioned about an earthquake under Lebanon. He actually bragged about it, in the hours leading up to it. They're going to continue to attack. Just even before we went on live, there was yet more attacks into Beirut. And, Netanyahu claims they were terrorist strongholds. And by all accounts, and it certainly looks from looking at the video, that's just random shots inside Beirut. And it seems unlikely to me that there were specifically things, and we know for sure they used to say the same thing in Gaza, and it was just part of a plan to just wipe out the infrastructure here. So it looks more pernicious than it does tactically relevant, but I think it was just a final warning from Netanyahu, who's saying if anybody does anything different, this will all start again. I think that's probably the more likely outcome, and not any kind of military necessity. Because if you've already agreed to a ceasefire, there's no more value in blowing up a bunch of other stuff if you've achieved a ceasefire. So the most likely scenario is that this was a pernicious act, and to just stick it to them one more time as a final warning of what could happen if they don't obey Netanyahu going forward. But if we know much about the Middle East and human nature by itself, people will submit for a while, but they will not succumb. And eventually, I think that this will get reignited, because no one's even attempting to get to the underlying causes. So I'm glad that the killing is going to stop for a while. I hope it lasts a long time. I pray that somehow, that maybe when the Trump administration comes in, that somehow, some way for a peaceful end to this can be found, and that the region and the people can just kind of get back to trying to live. I pray that happens. I just don't have very high hopes that it will. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.